Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show where we bring on those from the world of football to show you what it takes to be in the 11 at the highest possible level. Now, if you go back probably like 40 plus episodes ago, as a matter of fact, check out episode 42 if you want to have a little bit more context to the story. But we had a player named Jess Johnson on the show, and she was a player, and we talked about her experience playing professionally in Kazakhstan. And I actually have a teammate of Jess's on the show today, and she's a player who you'll hear me say it in the show, but she gets it, right? She understands it, and I always get excited to share any story that I can with all of you here on the podcast, but especially for those players who they take maybe the road a little bit less traveled to get to the professional ranks. And, she's a player who we'll get into it, but she's played in Israel, played in Kazakhstan, right? Places where you might not necessarily immediately to know, oh, that's a big footballing world. Let me go there to start my professional soccer career. But, as we talk about, sometimes the opportunities that are in front of you, they might not always look like the ones that you always envisioned or that you always dreamed of, but you got to take a leap and hopefully things will come. And she's played, all across Europe, all across the States now. And I'm sure there's a lot more to come from her. So Brenna Connell is in the 11 with us today, and I'm super excited to share her story. I will get you over to her in just 1 second. Quickly before I do, patreon.com/in the11. It will be linked down below as well. Would greatly appreciate it. You get access to all the episodes a day before anybody else does. So if you love the content, you want to get it just a hair before anybody else gets a listen, and that is for you. I would greatly appreciate it. It helps the show grow. Without further ado, here is myself. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined now by Brenna Connell, and a little bit of, as we just mentioned, an off-season period for her. So sometimes that can be a little bit quieter. Sometimes it can seem even more stressful than even when you're actually in a season and in the swing of everything. But thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us and to share your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on the pod.
Awesome. So as we just mentioned there, you're kind of back now in Maryland. That's where obviously your kind of love of the game sparked and grew up. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of the sport was like for you growing up, where maybe you played? Did you play other sports as well? What kind of was your relationship with soccer as a youngster?
Yeah, so I started really young. Like, my dad started kicking a ball around with me when I was like 4, and I just fell in love with it. I don't know, it was all I wanted to do. I I did, like, when I was young, like 4, 5, 6, I did stuff like ballet, I did swimming, like other little kid activities, like gymnastics, but nothing seriously. And sooner or later, it was like all I wanted to do was play soccer. Like, that was it. I didn't want to waste my time doing something else when I could just be kicking a football around. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I just grew up playing with like kind of the local rec teams, my age group. I kind of bounced around to different teams. And then when I was in high school, I joined Bethesda Soccer Club, which was one of the more like reputable clubs in the area. And that was when I was starting to get like more serious about it and trying to like forge a future with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it almost sounds to me as if kind of from an early age you knew sort of that this was that the dreams that you have sort of achieve now or kind of something that you had on your sights from a very young age. Like, did you kind of always know even as a young player and you're like, wow, I really do love this and I do think I want to, if I could play professionally at this one day, this would be the absolute dream.
Yeah, it was always the dream.
Mm,
I remember the 99 Women's World Cup. That was like my first exposure to like professionals and players on that stage, and I was just obsessed with all of them. Like Mia Hamm, Brianna Scari, like they were my heroes. Um, and I like immediately I was like, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
And obviously I've gotten closer, but not quite to that stage. But yeah, I wanted to just be great at soccer. That
Mm.
was my goal from being very little. And I used to play like at recess every day with the boys. Um, and that was just probably the most fun I in my career that I've had playing soccer was just those early days at recess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's so many players that can relate to that. Like there's a nostalgia kind of remembering when were young and playing the game, like when there was, a little bit less pressure and there wasn't quite as
Yeah.
much stakes on the game, and it was just kind of like going out for fun. There's something special about that, but I think it, like you said there, it sparks that desire to kind of see how far you can go with the game. Was something pops in my head. I think obviously the men's World Cup is happening now, and Christian Pulisic had mentioned something about when he was younger, he had like the same dream, like wanted to be a professional soccer player. And I think one of his teachers had told him, like, you should probably pick something that's a little bit more realistic, right? That's always the word people like to use. Like, did you ever kind of have any moments like that growing up, like having this dream, having this love for the game so much, and obviously the work rate to kind of put into it? But did you ever have people kind of being like, I don't know, are you sure you want to do that?
No, I think I was pretty lucky that everyone pretty much supported me. I
Mm,
think um I went to a very small school, and I had a couple of teachers who were like crazy about football just like me, and
mm-hmm.
totally, and can to this day still support me and reach out and see how I'm doing. And um so I was really lucky. I didn't have too many naysayers in my career, at least not in terms of like friends and family and teachers.
Yeah.
Everyone was pretty. I think they were, they saw it as like a healthy thing. Like sports is like I was staying out of trouble, so
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I think there wasn't. So they weren't too concerned about me. There were other kids that they were more worried about.
Yeah.
So they were like, "She's fine. She's got football."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I'm sure you can attest to, that probably helps a little bit to have sort of a supportive community around you, like kind of pushing you on to, go achieve those goals that you have for yourself. When you were in that stage where you're kind of playing in youth, and as you said, you now joined Bethesda where it got maybe a little bit more serious, was that kind of the thought started to come, like, all right, like how can I do this at the highest level collegiately? Was that kind of where your mind was shifting towards?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was young, I didn't really understand what it took um achieve those goals and to get to the top levels. And my parents were super supportive of me and drove me all around the country and
Mm-hmm.
stuff for games, but neither of them played soccer. Neither of them were really into sports, and they didn't really know how to guide me towards that. So it was kind of a learning process for all of us to figure out, okay, so you want to play in college? How do we do that? Um, so I think it was hard to figure out what I needed to do, and it started off being like, okay, I need to get on a better club team with more exposure to college coaches, and I need to maybe work a little more with strength and conditioning coaches, and do extra training on the side, jump in with other teams when my team isn't practicing. Just kind of trying to figure out, learn strategies for getting to college. And because I didn't really, even like early in high school, like ninth grade, 10th grade, I still didn't really know. The recruiting process was very scary and intimidating, and I didn't really know how it worked. I didn't know what schools I should be trying to contact. um, I wasn't recruited very much, especially not in the early years. So um, yeah, it was difficult to. There wasn't like a clear roadmap of, okay, you want to
Yeah.
play beyond youth. Here's how to do it. So, if I could go back and do it again, I'd, of course do it differently. But at the time, it was just figuring it out.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's you hit something really important there that like so many players I think they can kind of understand that they need to work really hard and train really hard, but there's a whole, especially, if you get to the college level or the professional level, there's a whole kind of new avenue that you need to sort of figure out, like how to communicate with teams, how to get yourselves opportunities. Like there's just so much to it that I think a lot of players don't know. And like, for some of
Yeah.
us, we didn't quite have that many resources. Like there wasn't quite, people making YouTube videos or podcasts or things like that. Like, not to say that this is the whole goal of why I do this, but in a way it kind of can be, to maybe have a player that is listening and then they say, oh, okay, so like that's how you get recruited to college, or, that's how you become a professional. Are there any of those things that you maybe look back on, as you said, you've learned a lot and maybe you would do it differently? Like if you did have a young player that reached out to you and was like, I'm kind of clueless about how to go and play college soccer. Like, were there any kind of one or two maybe highlights that you'd make sure that they would leave with?
Well, I will say that I feel like the recruiting process has changed a little bit since I went
Mm.
through it, and I'm not sure I even understand. I might not even be the best person to ask anymore what the best way is, because some of the rules have changed about contacting coaches. So, um, but based on my experience, I think a big thing is figuring out which schools to target that
Mm.
are the best fit for you. Like learning, I don't know, just finding people to talk to, whether it's your club coaches or just doing research online, figure out what are the different conferences, what's the style of play like in each conference, which teams are like the top teams, which teams are mid tier, which teams are lower. Even within
Yeah.
Division One, there's a huge, some of the teams are national champions, and some like are actually not very good at all,
Mm.
and some D3 teams are better than some D1 teams. So it's important to understand, like, just learn about what's out there and say, okay, where can I fit in? Which it's almost like when you're applying, you might have some that are reach, you have some
Yeah.
that are kind of your targets, so you think you can realistically play, and then some safeties where you're like, yeah, I could easily play there. So because I think I just didn't really understand, like, I was like, yeah, like I want to play at UVA,
Mm.
and I don't think that was, obviously, like those types of schools weren't looking for me.
Yeah.
So I should have focused more on middle tier schools. But to be fair, I don't know, I didn't know. And then also I guess I would tell players, like, um I don't know, it's, I guess when you're reaching out to coaches, I think they might have more research or more resources now in terms of video. If you can include some highlights of yourself playing, I know
Yeah.
that's a big thing for in the pro game
Yeah.
um, when you're like trying to contact coaches to play professionally. I don't know if they do that as much with the youth players, but I think learning what your best attributes are as a player and maybe getting some film of them that highlight that, um, and then reaching out to the coaches that you've identified that you think you could play for. But yeah, honestly, I don't think I'm a great person to ask about the college process anymore, because I think it's so different now.
Yeah, yeah, you certainly might be right, because I think for sure it's different than a couple of years ago, like when we played at that level. And
Yeah.
especially now, like I speak to college coaches, and it's such a different landscape with so many athletes who got an extra year due to COVID. Like the
Right.
whole kind of roster structure has shifted, and lots of players are staying for 5 years out of school, or something like
Mhm.
that. So but you do hit on some really important points that I think video is definitely important to be able to kind of showcase yourself a little bit before you actually get to speak to a coach, see if they have some interest. And then also, which I think is tough for a lot of players to like really have a true kind of evaluation of yourself, like know where you are as a
Mm-hmm.
player. I think growing up, any one of us who, love soccer, love football, we wanted to go to Stanford or we wanted to go to
Yeah.
Duke or wherever. And the reality is like, right, there's only 25 players that get on those rosters. And so there's got to be a fit for everybody out there. And sometimes, like you mentioned, maybe it's having really honest conversations with coaches that are around you, or people that watch you, and say, okay, like, who am I really as a player? What do you really think my level is? And yeah,
Yeah.
just being honest with yourself. Like, if you're not the best player at your club team, like, okay, it might be hard for you to go to Stanford or
Mhm.
something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. And I think, another thing I would do is I think pick up the phone and call more than
Mm,
emailing. I think
yeah.
I sent a lot of emails, didn't hear back a lot, and I think I should have, you know, been a little more aggressive. And I think a phone call, even now with today's everything's, there's a lot of ways to message people on Instagram and whatever, but I think a phone call really will set you apart. And um, have a coach, pick up their head and really notice, okay, this kid really cares and wants to connect. So I think that's a piece of advice I would give young players, is use the phone.
Yeah, yeah. The phone is definitely, and like you mentioned in the very beginning, I'm sure there's lots of rules, so I don't want to give anyone advice in terms
That's
of,
true.
yeah,
I use the phone
but
if you're
you're,
allowed.
yeah, in those periods when you're allowed. But the reason that I bring that up is just because, like, I've spoken to players who have gotten professional opportunities because they showed up to the club and they said, hey, like, can I speak to somebody? Can I speak to the sporting director or the coach? And can
Mm-hmm.
I come and train? And so like that kind of, as you mentioned, that proactivity, I'm not sure if that's a word, being proactive is what gets a lot of people something, because it shows that coach like, hey, I'm really serious about this and I'm willing to come and have that face-to-face conversation, instead of sending out an email that I've sent out to a ton of other coaches that look similar. So it's a really good point.
Yeah, for sure.
So how did that process then kind of wind you down to George Mason? Like, how did you land there?
So after, I think around sophomore year, or maybe junior year, my first choice was University of Pennsylvania. It's a great academic school, obviously,
Mm,
and also had a good program that I felt would be like it was a level I felt I could play at, and that my coaches told me I could play at. And I was really, really like super like I want to go there. That's going to be my school. My problem was, at this point, I think it was my junior year. The coaches at UPenn were like, "We like you. You're a decent player. We could have you here, but we've already identified our recruits for your year." And with Ivy League schools, they can only it's a little different from other schools. Like they don't give scholarships for
mhm.
athletics, but what they can do is pretty much guarantee acceptance for like a handful of recruits. So might be six. And I don't know if this is true anymore, but that's how it was for
Yeah.
me. And so they had, okay, well, they said, well, we already have our six that we're bringing in. You can apply on your own. If you get in, we'll be happy to have you. So I was like, okay, great. That's, I had all the things. I had good grades. I had good test scores. It wasn't
Mhm.
unrealistic for me to apply, but it's just such a selective school. And so I applied in like November of my senior year, and I didn't get in. They did not accept me to the school. So I was just totally devastated, of course.
Yeah.
And um, I had also had I had a handful. I had like three scholarship offers from three kind of mid-level D1 schools, um, and I went on official visits, and I did not really like the school. I didn't have a good experience on my visits. I didn't get a good vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and uh, then I was I can't remember why I became aware of Mason, but I ended up reaching out to the coach, and they they didn't have any scholarship money left, but they said, yeah, we can bring you on, um, kind of as a recruited walk on. So we know who you are, but you won't be getting any money your first year. And I think I was more interested in Mason because I think it was considered a little bit of a higher level program than the other three schools I was looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to play at the highest level I could. And so I think it was spring. It's like February, March of my senior year of high school, which is pretty late for most kids that go D1 to commit. But that's when I made the decision to go to Mason. And yeah, that's pretty much how that happened.
Yeah. Was that as I'm sure you've now experienced in your professional career, there's kind of there's so many highs and lows, right? That you kind of talk about, like as even we were mentioning the off season there in the beginning. It's like sometimes, it seems like a team's interested and then all of a sudden, something changes
Yeah.
and it's difficult sometimes. Was that experience kind of being so excited about Penn and then it just not working out the way you wanted to? Was that one of those first kind of experience where it was like, oh man, this is going to be a little bit harder than I expected to like really get to this dream?
That was, actually had like several experiences that were like that. So that was
Mm.
like kind of the cherry on top of a whole bunch of disappointments.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
like, because there were other schools that I'd been really interested in as well. Like Villanova, I really thought would be a good fit for me. The coach was like kind of lukewarm about me. So like initially he was interested, and then later on, like they just said no, basically, you're not for
Mm.
us, and that was really hard because I really liked that school. Um, I had a box of rejection letters from coaches, like at all these different schools that I reached out to, and like that initially were like kind of considering me and then ultimately said no. And so it
Hmm.
was kind of this, it was a pattern of just rejection. Like University of Miami was interested in me for a little while. And then they were like, no.
Mm.
And it just happened over and over and over. And finally, UPenn was like the final one that, so I was like used to the rejection at that point, but that one was still really hard to take because I thought I was going to get in.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like you said, it's something we experience now at the pro level as well. Um, so it was, I guess maybe it's a good thing that I went through all that. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think the unfortunate reality is that, every player, even the best players in the world, are going to kind of face that rejection or that adversity in some way, shape, or form. And,
Yeah.
there's just, there's no player that can go without being told a no at some point or being told, I don't think you're good enough to play here. And so, yeah, in a way, if we kind of flip it and think about it like, oh, I'm grateful that I had it at that younger stage. So now when it happens, it's like, okay, I'm used to this. I've done this a time or two and I know how to keep pushing forward. Obviously, there was so much kind of adversity that you faced, but when you were able to then find that home at George Mason, did things kind of fall into place a little bit and feel like it was a good fit for you in that freshman year?
Um, yeah, well, freshman year was a good year for me. Overall, Mason did not end up being a good fit for me, I think, looking
Mm.
back, even though I was there for 4 years. I had a good freshman year. Like, I think expectations were pretty low for me. I mean, the coach's expectations of me were pretty low. My own
Mm.
expectations were pretty high, as usual. But so I think I surprised a lot of people. I came in, I started a few games as a freshman. Um, I scored a goal, I had some assists, got a lot of minutes. I did really well. And then sophomore year was just kind of a nightmare for the whole team. There were a lot of kind of toxic personalities on the team that year, and there was a ton of team drama, and like it was just a mess. We didn't make our conference tournament. Our coach got fired. The coach that had recruited me and brought me
Yeah.
in got fired at the end of that year. And then junior year, I thought about transferring. Looking back, I wish I had. I think there would have been schools that I could have gone to at that point that would have been a better fit,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really look into it that much. And um, I think I remember you said you transferred, right?
Yeah. Yep.
A couple times. Yeah. So like
Yeah.
I really admire you for that because I was not, I guess, brave enough to take that plunge. Um, but yeah, so then junior year, we had a new coach come in, and he just didn't appreciate really what I had to offer as a player.
Mm.
Like, it just wasn't a good fit. So I didn't play very much, and I ended up getting injured at the end of my junior year. I tore my ACL, MCL, and meniscus
Oh.
all at once. um, so that didn't really help anything. And then senior year, I was just trying to come back from the knee, so I was just focused on getting back to 100%. And I played in a few games senior year. Was again just focused on physically returning to where I was. So I was kind of over college soccer at that point. I was
Mm.
like, um, this hasn't worked out the way I wanted it to, and I was just kind of ready to move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't. I think initially it started off pretty well as an experience at Mason, but I think the program in the end just actually wasn't that great a fit for me and the
Mm.
style of play and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Again, it sounds like almost in a way some of those things again like kind of boosted your resiliency to then go on and now do what you've done in your career, like facing coaching changes, which that happens often at the
Mhm.
next level as well, and injuries of course, and then trying to get back to healthy and things like that. Like being in that senior year and you're kind of feeling like you've had a bit of a difficult 4 years overall, and
Yeah.
obviously you're trying to get back healthy and get back to playing, get back to form. Like what's your kind of mindset of after graduating? Like, all right, I know I still want to play, but like I guess maybe take me through kind of where your head is at after that fourth year, that senior year.
So one thing that really kind of saved me and saved my career was playing with the Spirit Reserve team throughout college.
Hmm.
So um, the first year that I did that was, I think, the summer after my sophomore year, I think. I tried out. I had to go through a tryout process, um, and made the team. And I was surrounded by just incredible players in that environment. Like, um, out of that roster that year, that first year, like a ton of those players are playing in the NWSL now. One of them plays for Bayern Munich.
Hmm.
Um, couple of the other ones play in Spain. It was just I mean, I think almost every player that was on that team that year plays professionally now at a high
Wow.
level. And at the time that those players were at schools like Stanford, Duke, UNC, all the top schools that had kind of rejected me,
Hmm.
and I was kind of the odd one out going to a school like Mason. But it was really huge for my confidence to be like, okay, like here's these players at these top schools, and I can kind of hang with them.
Yeah.
I was certainly towards the bottom, in terms of ability, but it was just being there and training in that environment really made me so much better. And I played for that team almost every summer after that. So after sophomore year, And then that year, we won the W League National Championship, which was really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then, um, so I played for them after my junior year. I was coming back off of my knee injury, but I was able to train. I couldn't play games yet, but I trained with them. And then after senior year, I was starting to look ahead, and um, so one of my next steps was to continue training with the reserve team. And I think that was the first time I got a few opportunities to like jump into practice with the first team and have a few sessions with them. And so I think that was really big for me for looking ahead after college, was like having that as kind of a stepping stone. I think it would have been a lot harder if I hadn't had that connection
Yeah.
after college. I think it would like made it really hard to start looking for schools or for teams.
Teams. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
so important to like. I feel like I've found that the players who kind of give themselves the most opportunities are the ones that seem to have that success more like in the one sense, right? The more kind of jobs you apply for, hopefully the more lucky you'll be in terms of of an offer, right? But also, like I think sometimes so many players like they have an experience maybe like you did at George Mason, and their confidence kind of maybe goes down a little bit, or it's wavering, and they feel like I don't know, am I good enough to play this level, or can I even go higher than this? And I know I've experienced that too. But then, like, the more you keep kind of showing up, and maybe I try something new or I do something different, and then you get that little moment, like you said, where it's like, oh, okay, this is a good level, and I can play here. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
boom, that's that thing that can spark your confidence. So, like, unless you give yourself that chance, unless you go and you try something new or try something a little bit different, some players never get that, and they just are like, well, I couldn't do it here, so I probably
Right.
can't do it elsewhere. And you know better than anybody, like as much as we can say it, like football is a game of opinions, and there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
one coach that watches you play and is like, no, can't, not, don't even want that player. And there's going to be another coach that watches you play and is like, wow, I need to sign that player yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I definitely learned that with the experience having like, I go to Mason, which is like this sort of mid-level school, and I'm not even playing. And then it's like I'm playing with this reserve team against these great players and holding my own, getting positive feedback from the coach there. So I think that really taught me, like you said, it is so subjective, and
Yeah.
it's all about finding the right environment and the right fit. And you can be a terrible player in one environment and a great player in another environment, and you're still the same person. And so I think that is really like um, what led me to say, okay, I'm going to keep playing after
Mm.
college. Like, it's just, I need to find the right place for me.
Yeah. Were you trying? Did it feel like the Spirit was gonna be that kind of right place for you, and that opportunity, was that gonna be your first opportunity out of college, or can you maybe take me through a little bit that experience with that club?
Yeah, so I definitely didn't feel like the Spirit was going to be my first opportunity. I didn't feel like I was at that level yet.
Hmm.
Like, because like I had a couple opportunities to jump in training and stuff, but there were other players on the reserve team who were like training with the first team day in day out, and I was like, okay, those are the players that are going to be realistically looking to get signed by the first team after college, and I'm just not one of them. I'm not in that group. And so it was pretty clear to me that I would need to probably go overseas and get some get some more experience, get any experience at the pro level, and develop more as a player. So yeah, I think I wasn't really under any illusions that the Spirit would be calling for me after
Mm.
college. I didn't have, like I had non-existent stats basically. Like, I was not going to be someone who was going to be drafted or anything like that. And um, so I think I was pretty aware of that.
Hmm. So that first opportunity to go overseas, like, I mean, I know I can speak for myself too, like in a little bit of that same college recruitment kind of mindset that we talked about, where it's like, there was a lot of things that I didn't know about how to go and play college soccer. I think Europe, you could probably say the same thing. And there's even more things that I didn't know about how to go overseas to play in Europe. Like, how did you how did that opportunity come about for you to get your first chance to go overseas?
Um, so I think the one of the first things. Okay, so I played with the Spirit Reserves the summer after I graduated. Or no, that's not true. I It was the summer after my senior year, but I still hadn't graduated because I was a little bit behind in school, and I took the summer semester to finish school.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't actually finish school until like fall 2017. So I didn't look to go anywhere like immediately after um, most people had graduated in the spring. I was
Mm-hmm.
still like okay, I'm just gonna finish school. So I trained with the reserves that summer and finished school. And then it was like fall 2017. Um, I think one of the first things I did after finishing school was to go to a combine. Um, and it was down in Florida. And they had some scouts from some European clubs like Iceland and Sweden. And that was my first experience kind of playing in front of pro coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was a pretty good experience overall. It was a pretty well organized combine, and I didn't get any interest from the coaches, but um, they actually did this really good like player evaluation of everyone who came, and it was like they did it in a really like thoughtful way. Like you could tell they actually had seen me play. Like the feedback was very specific to my game, and I was like, okay, like they understand me as a player,
Yeah.
and it was really helpful to get that feedback. And they also said that they thought I had potential to play as a pro, so that was promising and helped me with my confidence, even though I didn't get any initial interest from any teams. Um, so then I think the next thing I did was try to find an agent. Um, so I signed with an agent, and he pretty quickly sent me to a club in Italy. It was second division, and when I got there, it turned out to not really be an ideal thing.
Mm.
It was like basically like a youth team, kind of like the girls were like 14, 15, 16, and the level just it wasn't it just wasn't somewhere I wanted to be. So I only stayed. I loved being in Italy. I loved the people. They were really, really welcoming and great. But the soccer just wasn't what I wanted to be a part of. So
Yeah.
I left after it just wasn't a professional environment, basically. So I left after a month, and that was my first overseas experience after college.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned too that moment where, like at the combine, where there's those professional coaches and there's professional scouts. That when someone says like that, I think you have the potential to play at the pro level. I think that's a pretty profound moment for most players when they kind of first hear
Mhm.
that for the first time, because we're constantly telling it to ourselves in our head. We're like, I know I can do it.
Yeah,
I know that I can play at that level. And then when somebody else verbalizes it, it's like there's just a different ring to it.
yeah,
Um,
for
and
sure.
then like it's funny though that kind of then immediately your first opportunity is like going to Italy, and all of a sudden I'm playing in a youth team, and you're like, again, like
Yeah,
and those highs and those lows, right? Okay, someone says I can be a pro, and now like here I am in Italy playing with an under 16 is what it seems
yeah.
like. um so after Italy, what's kind of the bounce back process from that?
So I went back to the reserve team with the Spirit, and I trained with them. This was like May 2018 at this point. And then I actually got an opportunity. The first team wanted to sign me as it's called a national team replacement contract, which is something that NWSL does, where like when all the national team players in the league go to camp, there's like usually the teams in the league still have a few games to play, so they'll sign players for like a month or two to fill those roster spots. So they wanted to sign me as an NTR, but unfortunately there was an issue because I'd played in Italy, or like the transfer window, it was outside the transfer window for America, so it just didn't work out for them to sign me. So that was like a super roller coaster moment. There was like the super high of like almost getting a chance to get a contract with the first team, and then, oh, you can't because of this technicality. So that was really hard. That was my first. That's what I did after Italy, and then I think briefly after that is when I went to Israel.
Yeah. Like you said, that roller coaster of emotions, right? Like, here's the contract. Oh, okay. No, gotta take the contract away. But I think
it
it
was
definitely,
terrible.
yeah. I think it definitely speaks to, like, we've just been hitting on here, like the resolve that a player has to have, right? Like, I'm sure you can feel upset and frustrated and kind of sorry for yourself for a moment, but then it has to be like, all right, okay, what do we do next? Like, how do we fix this, or how do we find what's next? And so that was Israel for you?
Yep, Israel was what was next. I actually found that opportunity through somebody I contacted through Instagram. She was a player that I think we crossed paths at Spirit or something, and I saw that she'd played in Israel, and I was just trying to find pretty much any opportunity overseas at this point. I felt like the agent I had at the time wasn't really helping me after the whole Italy thing. So I actually dropped him as an agent and started working with someone else. And but Israel didn't come through an agent. It came through basically a friend that I had, and she like got me in touch with ASA Tel Aviv in Israel. And I'm so grateful to that person for that. She's been such a big help throughout my career. And that was like this was my first pro contract was Israel. So that was really an important step for me. So yeah, I think it goes to show that sometimes, you can work with agents, but sometimes you can just network and find opportunities through just other, like, your peers. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that was definitely something I was going to ask you about, because I think that I've heard that seems to be a lot of the way that many players they go from all angles, right? Like, they're reaching out to clubs directly, they're kind of reaching out to contacts, whether it's former coaches or players or friends, and then also having
Yeah.
agents work on their behalf. I think oftentimes players can get into trouble, unless you're at the very, very top level, can get into trouble when they just expect their agent to come to them with this perfect opportunity on a silver
Yeah.
platter. And sometimes that might work, but sometimes you might just be waiting by your phone and a call may never come. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's easy for me to like gloss over it, but I had contacted like a million different people before Israel happened.
Yeah.
Um, like I reached out to international players that I knew, like that had come and played in the States. Like there was a girl who was from Iceland, who'd played at Mason, and I reached out to her and tried to find a team in Iceland, and she was super helpful. It didn't end up working out, but and that was kind of the story. Like I'd reach out to somebody, they'd either get back to, most people were really helpful, and most people would get back to me and give me some contact info for like a coach or a club. I'd reach out to the coach or the club, and it either wouldn't line up because of the transfer window, or there was some other issue, or they just
Mm-hmm.
weren't looking to sign any players at that time. But I really did do a ton of work to try to find opportunities, and like it really came down to just that one that worked out, but there was like 1,000 other opportunities that didn't work out.
Yeah.
um so yeah, it took a lot of work.
Yeah. So then what's the emotions like when you actually do have that opportunity that works and you get to sign that first pro contract in Israel?
I was really relieved that to find something.
Yeah.
I was excited to play. um and yeah, I was really excited. I i think I was a little bit disappointed when I got there. It didn't feel like a real professional environment as much as I had hoped.
Hmm.
Um, we trained at night because most of the girls had day jobs. So that was one thing. The facilities were a big step down from what I had in college and with the Spirit Reserves. Um, we only trained 3 days a week, which
Hmm.
was kind of shocking to me because I expected it to be like almost every day, the way like college was, and the
Yeah.
way that pro teams operate in the States. So I think there was a lot of things that and then just the overall level was like, there were some good players, some really good players there, but just the overall level was not um super high. So I guess it was difficult because I didn't really feel like a real professional just based on the environment. Like it was hard to be like, okay, yeah, technically I'm playing and I'm getting money, so I'm a professional, but the standards are not what I had expected. So I had mixed emotions when I got to Israel. I was like very happy to officially be starting my pro career, but it was also like maybe this isn't exactly what I envisioned.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit on so many important things there. Firstly, I think a lot of players have a similar sentiment to you when signing that first pro contract. And I think so many on the outside would expect it to be this moment of, pure joy and happiness. And oftentimes a lot of players will say the exact same thing that you just said. It was relief, like I was knocking on doors, and finally one opened. So it was more so
Yeah.
just like, oh, thank God, like more than just and there is that little bit of happiness too, right? Of course, but and then too, as you mentioned there's this, and it's a conversation that I think only those who have like kind of played at a certain level understand, like the balance between like what's actually pro and what's not pro, right? Like
Mhm.
because there's semi-pro teams out there in the world who will pay you and that's what you're doing, and you're making money and you're like, okay, this is, and then there's people who are in pro teams who are barely making enough to survive and have
Right.
other jobs, and there's so many varying degrees of it. And then, as you mentioned there too, you feel like in a way you show up to a club and you're like, I had better facilities when I was in college. Like I had better
Yeah.
access to, like I had a trainer there and I had all these things. And like here I'm training 3 days a week and like they can barely turn the lights on and like all those types of things. It's a very unique experience and different than what so many people imagine like pro to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a big challenge, was kind of reconciling what I expected pro to look like with what it
Mm,
actually looked like.
yeah.
And um yeah, and even some of the girls were like, what brings you to Israel? Like you have it so good in the States.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain, but it's like I'd tell them, I'd love to play in the States, but it's so competitive, I need to build up my resume kind
Yeah.
of. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's my favorite question I would get all the time is that well, what are you doing? And it's like, it's crazy because, you know, if you're playing for PSG, like nobody's ever going to ask you like, well, what brings you to
Right.
France? Like,
Of course,
but you
I
know,
know Fran-
but there's just those certain levels, there's certain teams where people are like, huh? You're
yeah,
doing
they're like,
what?
because a lot of those girls were actually trying to get to the States to play in college. A lot of them were
Yeah.
young girls, and so they were like, "Wait, you're doing it backwards. This doesn't make sense." So yeah,
And then, so I think kind of judging on based of what you're saying, maybe there wasn't that you weren't seeking maybe a second year in Israel or to kind of re-up that contract. It was like, all right, I've got a little bit of experience here. Let me see if I can, you know, take a little step up the ladder, kind of.
yeah, definitely. And well, we had a good season. We won the league, and we qualified for Champions League. So I did stay with them throughout the the end of the season, and then I stayed for the Champions League qualification round,
Mm-hmm.
which was in Bosnia, and that was a cool experience. But then after that, I was like, okay, yeah, it's time for me to find a new club. Try to move up the ladder, like you said.
Yeah. Is that
Yeah.
when you found Germany?
Yeah. So I was kind of in that limbo period of free agency for a few months. I was training a lot, and then Germany came about through an agent that I was working with at the time. There was this club in the second division in Germany that was fighting relegation, and they were um, trying to stay up. So they wanted to bring in like 5 American players, and it just sounded like a great opportunity. You know, Germany's such a great football nation.
Yeah.
Like even to play in the second division is pretty good. So I was very happy to take that opportunity, and unfortunately, it started off great, and then we played 2 games, and then COVID happened, and
Mm.
everything just went to shit.
Yeah.
So that, um, yeah, that was Germany.
Yeah. Yeah. Did that,
But
so I'm
I
guessing,
loved it.
yeah. I'm guessing that season then got canceled. Did you ever, you know, get to play again with that team, or was that just kind of had those, you know, couple games and then it was that was the end of that chapter of the story?
Yeah, so like we've been talking about the ups and downs. Things started off great. The coach really liked me, really saw like I felt really understood me as a player. Um, and we had this like scrim and Germany, it was a beautiful little town. Everyone's really nice. Just I really liked it. Um, we had this scrimmage, and I started the scrimmage. And the first half was just really rough. Like I just couldn't get a rhythm. I was giving away the ball. Like it just wasn't good. And they took me out at halftime. So, and I think that's one of the worst feelings I've ever had after a game was
Mm.
just not being able, like having a poor performance and not being able to redeem myself in the second half at all. Like I think that's probably the worst I've ever felt coming off of the field.
Yeah.
Um, and then, so then we had the first 2 games in that season. I didn't play a minute. Or I think I played like 2 minutes in the first game, and I didn't play at all in the second. So I was not feeling good about myself. But I was like, okay, I was counting on myself to prove that I could hang, that I was the player that they initially really liked and believed in. So I had all this drive and desire to like redeem myself.
Hmm.
Um, and then the league got canceled. um, so I didn't get that chance. And the sponsors um, pulled the funding from the club. So the club couldn't even pay us. Um, we went home, and the club ended up folding. They just couldn't continue financially.
Mm-hmm.
So I never did get a chance to actually like really play for them or have a career with them. So that was definitely a huge disappointment for me.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So then what was that COVID period like for you? It sounds like it was shaping up to be what it was for a lot of footballers of just
Yeah.
kind of training on your own and hoping that the sport would come back again and the world would open up and like you'd be able to get another chance.
Yeah, exactly. I was really depressed just coming off of that experience in Germany of just feeling like, I mean, I just felt like absolute shit. Like,
Yeah.
just not, I felt like, it was just, it was bad. And then to have to get up every day and train without knowing, like, when's the end date.
Yeah.
um, and I was staying with my parents up in rural Massachusetts. I trained in this like grass field with a lot of bumps on it, and it actually had some sheep that lived like right next to the field.
Yeah.
So I felt like, where am I? Like, what am I doing? And I'd be like working on, but I think I managed to be productive. I worked on like a lot of different technical things and really worked on myself technically. Um, and I think it was like something like 7 or 8 months of that,
Yeah.
just trying to stay fit and trying to get out every day and at least get some touches on the ball. Um, but yeah, it's kind of a blur. Like I don't even remember it that period of time very clearly. So yeah,
Yeah.
I remember the sheep.
Yeah, I think what made it so difficult as you kind of hit on there was that every other off season there's sort of this clear time frame, right? Where it's like I know I need to have a club by the time that the season starts at the very least, and I know when the season's going to start. And in COVID, it was just like I could be training like this for a month, 2 months,
Years.
and yeah, little did we know it was going to be 8, 9, 10 months for some of us. And so that ambiguity, that uncertainty, like it can really do a number on your motivation when like, I'm sure you had it where like I had days where I'd wake up and I'd be like, I mean,
Yeah.
what if I never get a chance again? And then I'm just training like I don't know.
Yeah, totally. It was like there were definitely days where I did not get out of bed, and I mean like at all. Like but I guess I just managed to, I guess you get in that habit as a footballer. You're like,
Yeah.
what else is there to do? You're just like, that's what you do. Is you get up and eventually you get yourself out of bed, and yeah, but it was a very weird time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. It eventually it sort of, which I think a lot of athletes can resonate with, is like it sort of just becomes a habit, in the same way that you brush your teeth every morning. Like, all right, when am I going to train? What am I going to work on? Like, it just sort of starts to become second nature.
Yeah.
When you so I'm curious then, maybe if we take out the COVID kind of element, because obviously that threw a whole different wrench into it. Like, for players out there, like what would you kind of say is the more difficult one, the getting that first contract or kind of staying a pro and keeping, all right, can I get the next contract and can I get the next one, right? Like, because I've kind of heard
Yeah.
both sides of it, like that it took so long to get that first opportunity, but then I have heard, like as you've laid out, like that free agency offseason period can sometimes be just as difficult to be able to get yourself another chance.
Yeah. I don't know if I could say one's harder than the other. They're like differently hard. I think
Mm-hmm.
that first initial contract is really important because without it, you're not going to get film. You're not going to be able to build your resume. I think that's really key.
Mm-hmm.
So I think and it's very difficult because you run into that like catch 22 where it's like, well, you need a resume to get a job, but you need a job to get a resume,
Exactly.
so It's like, how do you get a club to take a chance on you when maybe you haven't had a ideal college career and you only have like, you know, you have a video, but it's kind of grainy and you, you didn't score that many goals. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, how do you get over that first hurdle? I think that is incredibly difficult. Um, and then once you're in it, it's almost like it gets a little easier, I guess, because once you have something on your resume,
Mm-hmm.
you know, clubs are more, you know, you will find, I think once you have something on your resume, you will find other opportunities.
Yeah.
But I think what becomes hard is just the stamina, your own ability to keep training and keep improving and staying consistent when you're a free agent. And um, I think the hard part then just becomes, can you continue to improve yourself as a player? Can you continue to, you know, you're still going to experience the ups and downs.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
it's not like once you get that first contract, everything's not going to be just up. You still have a ton of downs, and they add up and they accumulate, and you can end up feeling like, wow, like, sure, I've had some good moments, but there've been so many bad moments. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
can I keep going? um I think that that becomes difficult once you've been in the game for a while, is like, there's been a lot of bad things that have happened, and it's like, can you keep going through all that and keep fighting for the good moments? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure if I can say which one is harder. They're just difficult in different ways.
Yeah, I get it because it's almost like you feel as if there's never really going to be that moment where you made it, right? Like even that signing of the contract is, you know, from the club's perspective, that's like they're looking at you like, okay, that's step one. Now you have to show up first day of work and you have to show us what you can do and perform day in and day out. And you know, for us as players and as
Right.
people, like we know the journey that it took for us just to be able to put that pen to paper. And so like there's a bit of a kind of desire to feel like I made it, I got there. But it's like no, it all goes again, and it's going to be just as tough, if not tougher. And it's kind of like that never ending cycle.
No, it's so true. Like, it's only half the battle once you've signed the contract. Like, it's great. You should celebrate that. That's a huge
Yes.
accomplishment. Um, but yeah, your work's not done. You still have so much to do. Yeah, it just never ends. The work never ends.
So then it's Kazakhstan is the next place that you found yourself, right after COVID.
Yes, it is. That that was like, COVID was still kind of going on, but
Mm.
it had, things were open enough where you could actually, they let you get on the plane. So
Yeah. Yeah, maybe there's never really a way for me to say like when COVID's done because
is
I
COVID
mean,
open now? I
yeah,
don't
maybe
know.
exactly.
Yeah, so I I was still working with the agent that had got me to Germany, and he found this opportunity for me in Kazakhstan. Which, whenever I say that, people are like, "What? Like,
Hmm.
why? Where is that?" Like, some people are like, "I've never heard of this country."
Yep.
I'd heard of it. I didn't know exactly where it was on the map. I had to, you know, look and find
Hmm.
it. But the team was actually a pretty well, like, reputable club. So they were ranked, like, I think 15th in Europe by UEFA because they'd done pretty well in Champions League.
Hmm.
So it wasn't just like a completely random team. Um, so that's kind of why I thought it would be a good opportunity. They'd had like, and this club also has had a history of having a lot of international players and a lot of American players. So I felt like, okay, they kind of know what they're doing with internationals. They know how to navigate the process. And um, so I decided, and I didn't really, there weren't any other options on the table. So I felt this was going to be the best opportunity for me. And I was excited to compete for a team that um, had a pretty good Champions League record. Because I'd gotten to compete in Champions League a little bit with the team from Israel,
Mm-hmm.
but we weren't really at the caliber where we could compete or get very far. And um, BIK, which is BIK Kazakh, was the team in Kazakhstan, and they'd had a pretty solid runs in the past of getting to like the round of 16 and stuff like that. So I was excited to go and compete against some top European teams. Yeah, so that was my next stop.
Yeah. Uh, it's funny, like you mentioned, I'm sure a lot of people said, where is that? Oh, where are you going? And I, like, for me
Yeah.
personally, sharing these stories, I always get excited when I hear like the stories of players going to places like that. Cause I'm like, ooh, those players get it. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
they understand,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
cause everybody that kind of understands the game understands, okay, they know the NWSL, and then they know the big clubs, right, in Europe, the ones in Germany and France and Spain, and the ones with the huge names. But the ones who really kind of get it, they know, like, a lot of those players who wound up at those big clubs, they had to start in places like Kazakhstan, Latvia, Slovenia, you
Mhm.
name it, and then they build up a name for themselves, and then they make it there.
Right.
So I'm sure for you there was a bit of an element of that, like, playing in a very unique place, different culture. I'm sure there were things you had to adjust to, but also I imagine it had to be nice to have that super high level of competition to look forward to, playing in the Champions League and testing yourself against all those big clubs.
Yeah, I know you talked to Jess a little
Yep.
bit about her experience. I listened to that podcast, and I was like kind of laughing because everything she said was like spot on. Like she talked about like the cows just randomly walking down the street, and
Hmm.
I was like, yeah, that I remember that. um, so yeah, it was a lot to adjust to, but um, it was a more professional environment than the other teams I played at.
Hmm.
We trained pretty much every day, and the level was pretty high. The players were very talented, um, so I was fairly happy with that. Um, and yeah, it was a lot culturally to get used to. The infrastructure is just different. Like,
Hmm.
things look like they're kind of crumbly. Like some of the buildings are a little questionable. You're like, is this safe? But it's actually a pretty. I mean, it's not fully like modern in the sense that it looks new and
Yeah.
fresh the way that buildings in Germany look, but you get the sense that in a few years it will look like that. Like that this country is on the rise and that things, um, very talented people and smart people. Um, so it's interesting. Um, but like the town where we lived is um, sort of a mix between like sort of rural, like small, very small little houses and marketplaces, and everything's kind of dirty and dusty, um,
Hmm.
and then you have a little bit more like urban areas with you know roads and highways and big buildings and stuff. So it's like, and it always seemed like they're building, like there was a lot of construction going on. So it was like it seemed like they're always trying to build and renew, and so it's kind of an interesting feel.
Mm. What was that like just kind of in the day to day for you? Because I'm sure, obviously, like you said, you're training every day, but that only kind of takes up a part of your time. Like, what else does a footballer do? For example, an American footballer, I know you're
Mhm.
with some other Americans. Like, what else do players
Yeah.
kind of do in a place like Kazakhstan where, maybe there's some things they have to adjust to culturally, or it's just going to look
Mhm.
different than, when you're playing at George Mason or something like that?
Yeah, so we there was some exploration that we would do, go into the town, buy food, check out the different places to get food. The Kazakhs our teammates were always like, all you guys talk about is food. apparently, like apparently that's an American thing, is to always be obsessed with food. But um, so if we weren't doing that, I actually when I think it was before COVID, I started this like part-time editing job that I do as like a freelance editor, and I can do it pretty much anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So it's online, and so I would spend some of my free time doing that, which was really, I think, good for me because it's like stimulates the mind, gives my
Yeah.
brain something to do. Um, Other than just sit, because I remember when I was in Israel, I didn't have this job and I had a lot of free time, and some of the time I would spend with like a teammate or two. We would go and do something, but a lot of the time I was just sitting like in my room just watching Netflix or sleeping, like,
Hmm.
not doing anything really productive.
Yeah.
So having this side job kind of really helped me. I kind of treat it like a hobby. Like it's really flexible, so I'm able to just do it like whenever I feel like it, and if I'm tired or I've like just worn out from training, like I don't have to do it.
Hmm.
So that kind of became my main hobby when I was in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, but you mentioned that. I think it's important to have some things where you can kind of disconnect from football for a little bit and have, like you said, other
Yeah,
things that are unrelated to occupy your time, but also, maybe it's something that you enjoy or anything like that. I think that's a really important thing. Um, so
yeah.
2 years in Kazakhstan, right? 2 seasons with that club.
Um, I was there for 1 year, but it was
Okay.
like uh I think I got there in October or November of 2020. Um, and then I left in October, I think 2022. Wait, um, 2021. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, so October 2020 to October 2021.
okay.
Um, so it was like two different Champions League seasons, but 1 year, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then is that when you returned to the States? And I know we spoke before we jumped on that you were with Spirit for this past year. Is that like, was that for that opportunity or kind of what was the reasoning behind leaving Kazakhstan at that time?
So Kazakhstan started off really well for me as a player. I I was like basically a starter, and we had two Champions League games against a team from Ukraine. Um, and I started both games, played 90 minutes. Um, and the first game was an away game, and I scored a goal, which was really key for us in getting through that round. And then the second game, I had an assist, so I felt like I was really contributing and like an important part of the team. Um, and then we qualified then for the round of 16 after winning um, those games, and we went home for winter break shortly after the Ukraine games.
Hmm.
And when we came back, um, it seemed like I wasn't in the coach's plans anymore. Like he brought in some new players who were very different from me, like talented players, but like very physical, like different style of play than what I offer. And it seemed like he was kind of favoring them for our next game, which was against Bayern. So I barely played against Bayern. I only got like a few minutes in each game, and I was really disappointed because
Yeah.
I felt like I was kind of had a key role in us even getting the chance to play them. So that was like really, really hard for me. And then we just had like after that we lost obviously to Bayern. So that was the end of our Champions League run, and then we just had the domestic league, and the domestic league in Kazakhstan, I think Jess touched on this, is really not very strong. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're winning games by double digits and stuff.
Mm.
Um, and and it felt like it took forever to get through those games. It was pretty much that whole summer was that season, and it
Mm-hmm.
just felt endless. And then we had the next Champions League season came around, and we played in Scotland. I didn't play. I maybe played like a couple minutes. So it was clear that like I wasn't really in the coach's plans anymore.
Mm.
Um, so I just basically was like, okay, well, after my contract is up, that's going to be it for me. It's going to be time to move on. Um, so yeah, it just wasn't the right fit anymore.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, crazy how things can sometimes seem to change that quickly too, you know? Like, it
yeah,
seems like from one game to the next, all of a sudden it's a completely different picture.
yeah, it was really surprising to me. I felt like, um, I don't know, I was just confused. I was like, the type of player I am.
Hmm.
I've shown what I can do. Because I think what didn't make sense to me was why they he could have, there was like a clause in the contract where during that winter break period they could have released me, and like they didn't have to bring me back in.
Hmm.
So I was just confused. Why bother bringing me back if you're not going to use me? To bring in an American, a foreign player is very expensive for them,
Yeah.
and you're not even using me. And it was very confused. Seemed strange to me. Like,
Yeah.
um, why even bring me in the first place if you know that, like, I'm not a big person. I'm like 5'3", not very physical. My game is all very technical, and like, I just avoid people. That's how I play. I find the spaces.
Mm.
um, and I think that's pretty clear when you watch my video, my highlight tape, and when you see me play in person. I think it's pretty apparent. What you see is what you get. So I was just a little confused as to why, if they know who I am and what I bring to the table, and you're not going to use me, like, why am I there? So that's, yeah, it was a strange situation for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it almost just goes to show kind of like as you've mapped out your career here, like there might not really be such a thing as a completely perfect situation, right? At least, especially in the early stages of your career, where you're kind of trying to get your footing and trying to get a resume and make a name for yourself. Like, there's going to be certain things that you might have to sacrifice on a little bit, or, certain things that might just not be kind of what you envisioned for them. And maybe that's a little bit of what kind of keeps driving us as players is like wanting to get to that situation where it's like, all right, the pieces are fit together here.
Yeah, totally.
So was
Yeah.
there a full circle kind of moment to come back and join the Spirit? Like, was that a cool experience for you, or maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually had gotten to know the Spirit coach at the time. Um, while I was in Kazakhstan, he was doing like video analysis. He wasn't the coach of the Spirit yet, or I think he was an assistant coach or something. And he was also doing he was offering video analysis for pro players. So I'd worked with him a little bit, and he that's how he saw me play, basically, was I was sending him my videos, and he's an excellent video analyst and was really helpful for me to develop as a player that way. And so that's how I had that connection. And so I think it was March or so, 2022, I reached out to him to see if I could just come train with the Spirit. And he said, yeah, absolutely. So he brought me out, and I wasn't sure if I would get a contract or anything, but I just wanted somewhere to train in the meantime while still looking for other opportunities. And it was great to be back in that environment, which is the team in Kazakhstan was fairly professional, but not at all compared to the Spirit. The level of professionalism is just so much higher in this country than pretty much anywhere else, except maybe at the top clubs in Europe. And it was just really great to experience that. It was really nice to have that level in training every day. And then I did end up signing. I got an NTR national team replacement contract, and this time everything worked out. I actually did get to sign it, so that did kind of feel like coming full circle a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess it was still a mixed experience because I was really thankful to be there and be part of it, but at the same time, I didn't feel like I was really fully part of the team, because I didn't have a full contract, and I didn't get to play in any games during my contract period. I wasn't rostered for any of the games.
Yeah.
So, I was there every day in training for the rest of the season, but kind of didn't feel like I'd fully made it, I guess. So,
yeah.
So there were some positives, but there were some negatives as well to that experience.
Yeah. Understood. And so as you kind of look ahead, I know you mentioned you're in this off-season period, this free agency kind of period. As you sort of look ahead, maybe towards, we don't even need to get into this next season, because I'm sure there's lots of things in the works for you right now, and sometimes it's almost like I don't want to jinx them by talking about any moment. And so trust me, I get that. But are there any things that you kind of look in your career these are some goals I maybe have for myself, or I'd really love to do, this or play here, or anything like that pops in your mind?
Yeah, well, it's still a goal for me to play in the NWSL and properly play and have a full contract and play games and stuff. I don't know if that'll happen down the road, but that is something that I'd really like to do. I'd also really like to play in Spain. That's definitely a goal for me. I think the style of play there would suit me. And I speak a little bit of Spanish, so I'd at least, the language barrier wouldn't be as difficult as other places I've played.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'd say those two things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your day to share your story, and it will be exciting for myself and for the listeners out there to kind of track your career as it continues to go, and hopefully we see you in a team in Spain someday, or even better in the NWSL. So once again, thank you so much, and yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
And that is a wrap on the Brenna Connell episode. I want to thank her once again for taking some time in an off season to share her story with me. I want to thank all of you out there who have continued to listen, support the episode, support the show. We're continuing to grow, continuing to put out amazing stories here in 2023, and so much of that is thanks to all of you guys out there. I would ask you here at the end, if you like the show, if you think it might be a good fit for somebody else, whether it's a specific episode or just the show in general, share it with one friend, right? Text them, DM them, something like that, to share the In11 podcast so we continue to grow this community. Thank you, Brenna. Thank you to all of you out there, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.